A sterile millionaire bought a little beggar, the daughter of a single mother. The next day he was paralyzed when he discovered the truth about her. Alexander Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the setting sun paint the city skyline in hues of gold and amber. At 52, he had everything money could buy: a thriving business empire, properties across the globe, and a collection of luxury cars that would make any enthusiast envious. Yet, as he gazed at his reflection in the pristine glass, all he saw was a man haunted by an inexplicable void. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting his contemplation. "Mr. Sterling, the board meeting is about to begin." "Thank you, Sarah," he responded automatically, straightening his Italian silk tie. Another day, another meeting, another set of numbers that meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 eager faces, turning to their CEO with practiced attention. Alexander had mastered the art of commanding respect, his presence alone enough to quiet a room. But today, as he began his presentation on quarterly projections, his mind wandered to the letter he'd received that morning from yet another fertility specialist. "The Sterling Group has exceeded expectations this quarter," he announced, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. The presentation continued, slides changing in perfect synchronization with his words, but beneath his polished exterior, a different narrative played out. 12 years of consultations, treatments, and disappointments had led to the same conclusion: he would never father a child of his own. The Sterling bloodline, with its centuries of tradition and distinctive hereditary birthmark, a small crescent, moon behind the left ear, would end with him. After the meeting, Alexander retreated to his private elevator, letting out a heavy sigh as the doors closed. The ride to the underground parking garage gave him a moment of solitude, a brief respite from the constant performance of being Alexander Sterling, business titan. His Bentley purred to life beneath him, the familiar leather seats offering little comfort. Instead of heading straight to his mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, he found himself taking a different route. These evening drives had become his therapy, a way to clear his mind when the weight of his legacy pressed too heavily on his shoulders. The city transformed around him as he drove, glass and steel giving way to modest buildings and family-owned shops. Here, away from the sterile perfection of his usual surroundings, life felt more authentic. Children played in small parks, parents called them in for dinner, and families shared meals through lit windows. As he stopped at a traffic light, his gaze fell on a small diner. Through the window, he could see a young mother sharing a milkshake with her daughter, both laughing as they drew patterns in the condensation on the glass. The girl couldn't have been more than 7, her pigtails bouncing as she gestured animatedly, telling some story that had her mother captivated. The light turned green, but Alexander lingered for a moment longer. How many times had he imagined such scenes with his own child? Teaching them to ride a bike, helping with homework, sharing Sunday morning pancakes in the kitchen that had never known the chaos of family life. Rain began to fall as he finally turned toward home, fat drops splattering against the windshield. The wipers swept back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm, matching the melancholy that had settled over him. His mansion loomed ahead, a magnificent structure that housed everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. Martha, his housekeeper for the past 2 decades, greeted him at the door with her usual efficiency. "Your dinner is ready. In the dining room, Mr. Sterling. Would you like me to serve it now?" "No, thank you, Martha. I'm not hungry tonight." He handed her his rain-dampened coat. "You can go home early." "Are you sure, sir? You haven't eaten since breakfast." Alexander managed a small smile at her concern. "I'm sure. Enjoy your evening." Alone in his study, he poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and settled into his leather armchair. Family photographs lined the shelves, his parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, all bearing the distinctive Sterling birthmark. All part of a legacy he couldn't continue. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows like nature's own symphony of solitude. Alexander closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. Tomorrow would be another day of meetings, decisions, and maintaining the facade of the man who had everything. But tonight, in the privacy of his study, He allowed himself to acknowledge the truth. All his success, all his wealth meant nothing without someone to share it with. Without someone to carry forward not just the sterling name, but the love, values and traditions that had shaped generations of his family. Little did he know that fate was about to intervene in the most unexpected way, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, legacy, and the true meaning of wealth. The following morning dawned grey and misty, the kind of day that made Emma Thompson pull her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she hurried her daughter, Lily, along the busy sidewalk. At 28, Emma's face carried both the softness of youth and the subtle lines of someone who had weathered more storms than her years suggested. "Mummy, look!" 7-year-old Lily pointed excitedly at a display of stuffed animals in a shop window, her breath fogging the glass. "That bear looks just like Mr. Snuggles before he got old." Emma's heart clenched at the mention of the beloved teddy bear they'd had to leave behind during their last hasty move. "Yes, sweetheart, it does," she managed, gently tugging Lily along. They couldn't afford to be late today, not when every minute of work meant food on their table. The diner where Emma worked was already bustling when they arrived, the morning rush in full swing. Betty, the owner, looked up from the counter with a mixture of relief and concern. "Emma, thank goodness, table 6 has been asking for you." Her eyes fell on Lily. "Everything okay with the sitter?" "She's sick today," Emma explained, already tying her apron. "I couldn't find anyone else on such short notice. I'm sorry, I know it's not ideal." "Nonsense," Betty waved off her concerns. "Lily can sit in the back booth like always. Just make sure she has her books." Lily was already pulling out her worn copy of The Secret Garden from her backpack, along with a small notebook and colored pencils. She had spent countless hours in that booth, drawing pictures and doing homework, while her mother worked double shifts to keep them afloat. As Emma moved between tables with practiced efficiency, she couldn't help but steal glances at her daughter. Lily sat quietly, lost in her own world of stories and drawings, occasionally tucking her long brown hair behind her ear, revealing for just a moment the small crescent-shaped birthmark that had always fascinated Emma. The mark seemed to shimmer, sometimes in certain lights, like a tiny moon watching over her daughter. The morning rush gradually gave way to the quieter lull of mid-morning, allowing Emma a moment to catch her breath. She was refilling coffee cups when she overheard two customers discussing the latest news about Alexander Sterling, the city's most prominent businessman. "Did you see the article?" one woman asked her companion. "They say he's worth billions now, but he lives all alone in that massive mansion. No wife, no kids, just his money to keep him company." Emma's hand trembled slightly as she poured, memories she'd fought hard to suppress threatening to surface. She forced them back down, focusing instead on the simple task before her. The past was the past, and she had more pressing concerns, like the envelope in her pocket containing another, late rent notice. During her break, she sat across from Lily, sharing a plate of day-old muffins Betty had insisted they take. "How's the story, sweetheart?" "Mary just found the key to the garden," Lily replied, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mummy, do you think there are any secret gardens in our city?" "I'm sure there are all kinds of magical places waiting to be discovered," Emma smiled, reaching out to brush a crumb from her daughter's cheek. "You just have to know where to look." But as she watched Lily return to her book, Emma's smile faded. They had been running for so long, moving from city to city, always looking over their shoulder. The weight of her secrets pressed heavily on her shoulders, along with the crushing responsibility of protecting Lily from truths she wasn't ready to understand. The afternoon brought rain again, drumming against the diner's windows in a steady rhythm. Emma served plate after plate, smiled at customers, and calculated tips in her head, each dollar bringing them slightly closer to making rent, yet still so far from true security. As her shift neared its end, she noticed Lily had fallen, asleep in the booth, her book open on the table and her dark hair falling across her face. In sleep, she looked so much like... Emma quickly shut down that train of thought. Some doors were better left closed, some memories better left buried. But fate had other plans, and as Emma would soon discover, the past has a way of refusing to stay hidden. The truth she had guarded so carefully was about to collide with the present in ways she could never have imagined, bringing her face to face with choices she thought she'd never have to make again. The week had been particularly challenging for Emma. The rent was due, Lily needed new shoes for school, and the diner's regular customers had been fewer than usual due to the persistent rain. As she counted her tips after closing time, her heart sank. Even with Betty's generosity in providing them meals, they were still falling short. "Mommy?" Lily's voice pulled her from her calculations. "Can we stay at the park for a little while? The rain stopped." Emma glanced at her watch. The small park across from the diner would still be lit by the street lamps, and Lily had been so patient all day. "Just for 15 minutes, okay?" The early evening air was crisp and clean after the rain, carrying the promise of spring. Lily ran to the swings, her favorite spot, while Emma sat on a nearby bench, mentally reviewing their options. They could probably stretch their groceries for another few days, and maybe Mrs. Chen from the thrift store would let her work some extra hours on weekends. Lost in thought, Emma almost missed the moment Lily's swing went too high. Her daughter's startled cry snapped her to attention just as Lily lost her grip on the chains. Time seemed to slow as Emma launched herself forward, knowing she wouldn't reach her in time. But someone else did. A tall figure in an expensive coat moved with surprising agility, catching Lily before she hit the ground. Emma's heart nearly stopped as she recognized Alexander Sterling, the businessman her customers had been gossiping about earlier that day. "Careful there, young lady," he said softly, setting Lily gently on her feet. "Are you all right?" Lily nodded, momentarily speechless, a rare occurrence for her. Emma rushed over, checking her daughter for any injuries. "Thank you, Thank you so much." "Sterling," he supplied, though something in his expression suggested he was used to being recognized. "Alexander Sterling. And please, no thanks. Necessary. I'm just glad I was walking by at the right moment." Emma noticed he seemed distracted, his eyes fixed on Lily with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Then she realized Lily's hair had fallen away from her ear, revealing her birthmark in the glow of the street lamp. Alexander blinked, as if coming out of a trance. I apologize for staring. It's just that marking. It's quite unusual." "It's my special moon," Lily proclaimed proudly, apparently having found her voice. "Mommy says it means I'm magical." A strange expression crossed Alexander's face. Pain, wonder, and something else Emma couldn't quite identify. He reached up, absently to touch his own left ear, a gesture that sent a chill down Emma's spine. "Indeed it does," he replied, his voice slightly hoarse. "I've never seen another quite like it." His eyes met Emma's, full of questions she wasn't ready to answer. "We should be going," Emma said quickly, taking Lily's hand. "It's past dinner time. Thank you again, Mr. Sterling." "Wait," he called as they turned to leave. "Please, I know this may seem forward, but I'd like to help. As a thank you for brightening my evening with such delightful company." He pulled out a business card and held it out. Emma stared at it, not moving to take it. Alexander's next words were careful, measured. "I own several businesses in the city, including a children's clothing store. Please, let me at least provide your daughter with a new wardrobe for the coming season. I noticed her shoes are quite worn." Emma felt her face flush with embarrassment and a touch of anger. "We don't need charity, Mr. Sterling." "Not charity," he corrected gently. "Consider it a reward for Lily's bravery on the swing. I've never seen anyone go quite so high." Lily beamed at the compliment, but Emma remained hesitant. Years of protecting her daughter had taught her to be wary of unexpected kindness, especially from powerful men. "Please, Mommy." Lily tugged at her hand. "I promise to be more careful on the swings." Emma looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then back at Alexander Sterling. In the lamplight, his expression was open, almost vulnerable, so at odds with the powerful businessman she'd heard about. Something in his eyes reminded her of herself, a deep loneliness, a yearning for connection. Against her better judgment, she reached out and took the card. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. We'll think about it." He nodded, relief flickering across his features. "The offer has no expiration date. "Good evening, Lily. Ms. Thompson," Emma supplied, immediately regretting giving even that much information. "Emma Thompson." As they walked away, Emma could feel Alexander Sterling's gaze following them. She clutched Lily's hand tighter, fighting the urge to run. In her pocket, his business card seemed to burn against her thigh, a tangible reminder that their carefully constructed world was about to change. Behind them, Alexander stood motionless in the growing darkness, his hand still touching his left ear where an identical crescent moon birthmark had marked his family for generations. His mind raced with possibilities he'd never dared to hope, for even as his heart warned him not to jump to conclusions. But one thing was certain. He wouldn't rest until he understood why this little girl bore his family's distinctive mark. That night, sleep eluded both Emma and Alexander. Though neither knew the other lay awake just miles apart, haunted by the evening's encounter. In their small apartment, Emma sat at the kitchen table long after Lily had gone to bed. Alexander. Sterling's business card lying before her like a ticking time bomb. The moonlight streaming through the window cast strange shadows across the embossed letters of his name, making them dance and blur before her tired eyes. She pulled out an old shoebox from the highest shelf of her closet, hands trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside lay the few treasures she'd allowed herself to keep from her past, a faded photograph, a small silver locket, and a newspaper clipping she hadn't looked at in years. The headline still had the power to make her breath catch. "Sterling heir vanishes without a trace." Emma touched the photograph gently, tracing the outline of a grand mansion she'd once known well. The memories flooded back, unwanted but unstoppable, elegant. Parties, whispered conversations and promises that had turned to dust. She'd been so young then, so naive. In his study across town, Alexander paced restlessly, his usual glass of scotch untouched. He'd spent hours researching the name Emma Thompson, but found nothing unusual. It was too common a name, too easy to hide behind. Yet something about her reaction to him, the way she'd almost seemed to recognize him despite claiming not to, nagged at his instincts. And then there was Lily. He couldn't shake the image of her birthmark, identical to his own. To his father's, to every Sterling for generations. The probability of such a coincidence was astronomical. His fingers moved to his computer keyboard, typing out an email to his most trusted private investigator, then stopped. No, this required a more delicate touch. He picked up his phone instead, dialing a familiar number despite the late hour. "Sarah? I apologize for calling so late, but I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow, all of it. And I'd like you to find out everything you can about a diner somewhere near Kingston Park. I believe it's called Betty's." Back in her apartment, Emma tucked Lily's blanket more securely around her sleeping form. Her daughter stirred slightly, moonlight highlighting the crescent mark behind her ear. "Mommy?" she murmured sleepily. "Can we really go shopping with the nice man?" Emma's throat tightened. "We'll see, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." She retreated to the kitchen, pulling out her worn notebook, the one where she kept track of their movements over the years. 7 cities in 7 years, always staying just long enough to save some money before moving on. But this time was different. This time, Lily had friends at school, was finally starting to put down roots. The thought of uprooting her again made Emma's heart ache. Perhaps they could stay. Perhaps Alexander Sterling's appearance was just a coincidence. Perhaps the birthmark was just a quirk of genetics, not the family trait she knew it to be. Perhaps she could keep pretending that the past was truly behind them. But as she finally lay down to sleep, Emma knew she was only fooling herself. The truth had been set in motion the moment Alexander Sterling's eyes had fallen on that crescent moon behind Lily's ear. Now she had to decide, keep running or stay and face whatever came next. In his mansion, Alexander stood at his bedroom window, watching the same moon that had witnessed their chance encounter. His fingers traced the familiar pattern behind his ear, a gesture he'd made countless times over the years. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like a sign. He thought of the sadness in Emma Thompson's eyes, the worn state of her clothes, the protective way she held her daughter. Whatever their story was, whatever connection might exist, one thing was clear. They needed help, even if they wouldn't admit it. And Alexander Sterling had never been one to ignore a mystery, especially one that might finally fill the void in his life. As dawn approached, both Emma and Alexander made their decisions. She slipped the business card into her wallet, knowing she would use it, if only for Lily's sake. He sent a brief email to his investigator, not asking for a background check, but for something simpler, the operating hours of Betty's diner. Neither could have known that their parallel sleepless nights were just the beginning. Forces set in motion years ago were finally converging, and the truth, no matter how carefully buried, was about to emerge into the light of day. 3 days after their encounter in the park, Emma stood before the Little Princess boutique, gripping Lily's hand tightly. The store's elegant facade, with its enchanting window displays and gold-leafed lettering, made their reflections seem even more out of place. Yet here they were, Alexander Sterling's business card clutched in Emma's, other hand like a golden ticket. "It looks like a castle, Mommy," Lily exclaimed, pressing her nose against the window. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across racks of beautiful children's clothing. A musical tune drifted through the door each time a customer entered or exited. Emma took a deep breath. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart. We're just looking, and we'll only get what you absolutely need for school." But as they pushed open the door, Emma realized just looking might not be an option. Alexander Sterling himself stood at the counter, engaged in conversation with an elegantly dressed sales associate. He looked up at the sound of the bell, and Emma could have sworn she saw relief flash across his features. "Miss Thompson, Lily," he greeted them warmly, moving forward. "I'm so glad you came." Lily beamed at him, any trace of shyness gone. "Your story's beautiful, Mr. Sterling. It looks just like the secret garden, but with clothes instead of flowers." Alexander chuckled, and Emma noticed how the sound seemed to surprise even him, as if he wasn't used to laughing. "Well then, we must give you the grand tour. Sophie here is our best guide when it comes to finding magical wardrobes." The sales associate stepped forward with a professional smile, but Alexander raised his hand. "If you don't mind, Sophie, I'd like to help our special guests myself." Emma started to protest, but Alexander's gentle expression stopped her. "Please, Ms. Thompson, allow me this small pleasure. It's not often I get to see the joy my stores bring to children firsthand." As they moved through the store, Emma couldn't help but notice how natural Alexander was with Lily. He listened intently to her stories about school, asked thoughtful questions about her favorite books, and seemed genuinely delighted by her enthusiasm for everything she saw. "Oh!" Lily gasped, stopping before a display. A pale blue dress with silver embroidery hung at its center, surrounded by twinkling lights. "It looks just like—" She cut herself off abruptly, throwing a guilty glance at her mother. Emma felt her heart skip a beat. The dress was nearly identical to one Lily had owned as a toddler, before they'd had to leave everything behind. Alexander's eyes darted between them, catching the unspoken exchange. "Just like what, Lily?" "Nothing," Emma interrupted quickly. "Lily, sweetheart, why don't we look at some practical things for school?" But Alexander had already noticed something else, Lily's unconscious gesture of touching the birthmark behind her ear, a habit he shared. His expression shifted subtly, and Emma knew he was adding another piece to a puzzle she couldn't let him solve. "Actually," he said carefully, "this dress was inspired by an old photograph from my family's collection." He hesitated, then continued. "My mother wore something similar when she was young. It was a tradition in our family. Every little girl would wear such a dress for her first formal portrait." Emma felt faint. She knew exactly what photograph he was talking about. She'd seen it hanging in the Sterling Mansion's grand hallway years ago, but there was no way she could explain how she knew that. "Can I try it on?" Lily asked hopefully. "Please, Mommy?" Before Emma could respond, a crystal-clear memory hit her. Another little girl, another blue dress, another plea. She steadied herself against a nearby rack, and Alexander moved instantly to support her elbow. "Ms. Thompson, are you all right?" "You've gone quite pale." "I'm fine," she managed, "just a bit overwhelmed. It's been a long time since we've done any real shopping." His hand lingered on her arm, concern evident in his eyes. "Perhaps we should sit for a moment. There's a lovely tea room just next door. We could take a break, have some refreshments." The invitation was innocent enough, but Emma knew better. She could see the questions building behind his careful expression, the way his gaze kept returning to Lily's birthmark. They were getting too close, sharing too much. But before she could decline, Lily spoke up. "Can we have hot chocolate? The ladies at the diner always say you make the best hot chocolate in a..." "The city, Mr. Sterling." Alexander's face softened with genuine pleasure. "The secret is in the hand-shaved chocolate and a tiny pinch of cinnamon. It's an old family recipe, passed down through generations of Sterlings." Another memory struck Emma, the rich aroma of that same hot chocolate, served in delicate china cups on cold winter evenings. The taste of cinnamon on her tongue, the warmth of the cup in her hands, the sound of soft laughter and gentle music. "Ms. Thompson?" Alexander's voice brought her back to the present. "You seem far away." "Just remembering something," she replied carefully. "Lily, we can try on the dress, but then we really should focus on school clothes." As Lily disappeared into the fitting room with Sophie, Alexander turned to Emma. His voice was soft, meant only for her ears. "It's strange, isn't it? How certain things can trigger such vivid memories, almost as if they're trying to tell us something we've forgotten, or something we're meant to remember." Emma met his gaze, seeing in it a dangerous mixture of curiosity and determination. She had to be more careful. The past was stirring, and Alexander Sterling was proving to be far more perceptive than she'd hoped. After Emma and Lily left the boutique, with far more packages than Emma had intended, thanks to Alexander's insistence that everything was a gift for his brave, swing-set friend, he retreated to his private office above the store. The space was rarely used, maintained more out of habit than necessity, but today he was grateful for its solitude. He opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard as he debated his next move. The afternoon had provided more questions than answers, but one thing was certain: Emma Thompson was hiding something. Her reactions to the dress, to the hot chocolate, to even the smallest mentions of Sterling family traditions had been too specific, too emotional to be coincidence. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in, Sophie." His longtime employee entered, carrying a garment bag. "Sir, you asked me to save this." She held up the blue dress Lily had tried on. "Though I must say, it's unusual for you to take such a personal interest in our customers." Alexander smiled faintly. "Did you notice anything unusual while helping the little girl?" Sophie hesitated. "Well, when she was changing, I saw a birthmark behind her ear. It looked exactly like..." She stopped, clearly unsure if she should continue. "Like mine," Alexander finished quietly. "Like every Sterling has had for generations." "Sir, you don't think..." "I don't know what to think, Sophie, but I need you to do something for me. That dress Lily tried on, the one that made her mother so uncomfortable, I want you to find the original design in our archives. It would have been from about 30 years ago." Sophie nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The collection your mother designed before she retired. I remember because each piece had a story behind it." "Yes," Alexander confirmed, "and this one was special. It was the last dress she designed, meant for..." He broke off, the memory still painful after all these years. "For your daughter," Sophie finished softly, "the one who disappeared." Alexander stood, moving to the window. Below, he could just make out Emma and Lily waiting for a bus, surrounded by shopping bags. Lily was twirling, showing off her new coat to her mother, her laughter visible even from this distance. Emma caught her mid-spin, hugging her close, and something about the gesture made Alexander's chest tighten. "Sophie, what do you remember about that time? About Claire? Your wife?" Sophie's voice was gentle. "I was just starting here then. She was luminous, everyone loved her. And when she told us she was expecting..." She paused. "Sir, are you thinking that maybe..." "I don't know what I'm thinking," Alexander admitted. "But watching them today, Lily has Claire's laugh, the way she moves, the way she tells stories, and that birthmark." Sophie moved to stand beside him at the window. "The baby was taken before Claire even got to hold her. Nobody ever found out what happened. And then when Claire..." When she couldn't bear the loss and left, Alexander finished. Yes, but Sophie, look at Emma Thompson, really look at her. Sophie gasped softly. She looks just like Claire did back then. A little thinner, maybe. More worn. But the resemblance is striking, Alexander agreed. And she knows things, Sophie. Things about the Sterling family that she shouldn't know. The hot chocolate recipe, the significance of that dress. She tries to hide it, but I can see the recognition in her eyes. What are you going to do? Alexander touched the birthmark behind his ear, a gesture that had become almost unconscious over the years. I'm going to find out the truth, but carefully. If I'm right, if Lily is who I think she might be, I can't risk frightening them away. He turned from the window, decision made. I need you to pull all the records from that time. Employee files, security logs, anything we still have. And, Sophie, let's keep this between us for now. After Sophie left, Alexander returned to his laptop. He opened a folder he hadn't looked at in years, filled with newspaper clippings about his daughter's disappearance. The headlines seemed to mock him. Sterling heir still missing. No leads in heiress kidnapping. Sterling family offers record reward. But one article caught his eye, a small piece he'd somehow missed before. It mentioned a young nurse who had disappeared around the same time, leaving no trace. The hospital had written it off as a resignation, but looking at the grainy photo, now Alexander felt his heart stop. The young woman in the photo could have been Emma Thompson's twin. He leaned back in his chair, mind racing. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they formed a picture he wasn't sure he was ready to see. If he was right, if Lily was his long-lost daughter, then who was Emma Thompson? And more importantly, why had she spent the last 7 years running? That evening, after tucking an exhausted but happy Lily into bed with her new stuffed bear, Emma sat alone in their small living room, surrounded by shopping bags from the Little Princess boutique. Each item Alexander had insisted on gifting them felt like a step closer to the edge of a precipice she'd been avoiding for 7 years. She pulled out her worn leather journal from its hiding place behind the loose baseboard. Its pages held not just her memories, but the truth she'd protected for so long. As she opened it, a photograph slipped out, a much younger version of herself in a nurse's uniform, standing proudly outside St. Michael's Hospital. "I'm sorry, Claire," she whispered to the empty room. The words felt inadequate, as they had every day since that fateful night. She could still hear Claire Sterling's voice, weak but determined, in those final moments. "Take her," Claire had pleaded, pressing the newborn into Emma's arms. "He'll never let her be anything but a Sterling. She deserves to be loved for who she is, not what she was born to be. Promise me you'll give her that chance." Emma closed her eyes, the memories washing over her. She'd been fresh out of nursing school, assigned to the maternity ward's night shift. Claire Sterling had been her favorite patient, kind, genuine, and terrified of the weight of expectations being placed on her unborn child. Over the weeks of Claire's difficult pregnancy, they'd grown close. Claire had confided her fears about the Sterling legacy, the suffocating pressure of perfection, and her husband's obsession with maintaining the family's reputation. She'd shown Emma the family photos, told her the stories behind every tradition. And when complications arose during delivery, Emma shook her head, forcing the painful memories away. She'd made her choice that night, driven by a promise to a desperate mother and her own belief that she was doing the right thing. But now, seeing Alexander with Lily, witnessing his genuine warmth and caring, she pulled out her phone, opening the browser to search for news about Alexander Sterling. The results painted a picture very different from the cold, controlling businessman Claire had feared. Articles spoke of his charitable work, his progressive business practices, his dedication to children's causes. And in every photo where he thought no one was watching, there was that same loneliness she'd seen in the park. A soft sound from Lily's room made her look up. Her daughter stood in the doorway, clutching her new bear. "Mommy, I had a dream about the big house again." Emma's heart skipped a beat. These dreams had started shortly after Lily's 7th birthday. Fragments of memories she shouldn't have, couldn't have. "What did you see this time, sweetheart?" "There was a lady singing to me," Lily said, climbing into her lap. "She had hair, like yours but longer, and she was crying while she sang. The song was about a moon and a star." She hummed a few notes, and Emma felt her blood run cold. It was Claire's lullaby, the one she'd sung every night during her hospital stay, the one she'd whispered to her newborn daughter in those precious few moments they'd had together. "And there was a big painting," Lily continued, her voice growing sleepy again, "with lots of people who had the same moon as me." She touched her birthmark. "Mr. Sterling has one too, doesn't he, Mummy? I saw it today when he was helping me try on dresses." Emma held her daughter tighter, her mind racing. The dreams were becoming more frequent, more detailed, and now, with Alexander Sterling back, in their lives... "Mommy?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper now. "Why do I feel like I know him? Like I've seen his smile before?" A tear slipped down Emma's cheek as she stroked her daughter's hair. "Sometimes our hearts remember things our minds have forgotten," she said carefully, "but right now you need to sleep." After carrying Lily back to bed, Emma returned to the living room and her journal. She turned to the last page, where she'd pasted the article about Claire Sterling's disappearance 3 years after that night. The official story was that she'd left her husband, unable to cope with the loss of their child. But Emma knew the truth. Claire had found peace in a small monastery in Europe, where she'd lived out her remaining days praying for her daughter's happiness. Emma had visited her there once, showing her photos of Lily growing up. Claire's last words to her had been, "I was wrong about him, Emma. Alexander, he would have been a wonderful father. Promise me you'll tell her the truth someday." Now, looking at the business card on her table and the shopping bags full of gifts chosen with such obvious care, Emma wondered if that someday had finally arrived. But first, she needed to understand. Not just Alexander Sterling the businessman, but Alexander Sterling the man, the father who had never stopped searching for his daughter. She picked up her phone again, this time dialing a number she hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Sister Mary Catherine, it's Emma. Yes, I know it's been a long time. I need to know everything you remember about the night Claire Sterling gave birth. I think it's time for the truth to come out." Alexander sat in his study well past midnight, surrounded by old photographs and hospital records. His conversation with Sophie had sparked something in his memory, a detail so small he'd overlooked it for years. In every picture of Claire from her last months at the hospital, there was the same young nurse in the background, watching, caring, present in ways he hadn't been. He picked up a particular photo, studying it closely. Claire was sitting in the hospital garden, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, laughing at something off camera, and there, partially visible behind a flowering bush, was a young woman with Emma Thompson's face. His hands shook as he reached for another file, Claire's private diary, which he'd found among her things after she left. He'd never been able to bring himself to read it, but now... He opened it carefully and a pressed flower fell from between its pages. A forget-me-not, Claire's favorite. "My dear friend Emma," the entry began, and Alexander felt his world shift. "You understand what no one else does. The weight of the Sterling name, the pressure of perfection, the fear of not being enough. Today you told me about growing up in foster homes, about dreaming of giving children the love you never had. I see how you care for every baby in the ward, how you sing to them, comfort them. I pray my daughter will know such pure, unconditional love." The diary slipped from his fingers. Emma. The nurse's name had been Emma. How had he never made the connection? He reached for his phone, dialing his assistant. "Sarah? I apologize for the late hour, but I need you to find something in the hospital's old employment records. Look for an Emma." "Emma." He trailed off, realizing he didn't know her surname. Then, "Look for any Emma who worked in the maternity ward the year Claire was there." While waiting for Sarah to work her magic, Alexander turned to his computer, searching through more recent records. Emma Thompson had appeared in the city 7 months ago. Before that, he found traces of her in 6 other cities, never staying. More than a year in each place. Always working in diners, always keeping to herself. Always with a little girl who would have been born right around the time his daughter disappeared. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Found her. Emma Foster, graduated top of her class from nursing school. Worked at St. Michael's for 2 years. Disappeared the same night as, oh my God, Mr. Sterling, the same night your daughter. Alexander's mind raced. Emma Foster, a foster child who became a nurse, who befriended his wife, who vanished the night his daughter disappeared, who reappeared years later as Emma Thompson, with a little girl bearing the Sterling birthmark. But why? The question haunted him. Claire's diary suggested a deep friendship, trust, even love between the two women. If Emma had taken his daughter, it hadn't been for money. She'd been living on the edge of poverty for years. It hadn't been for fame. She'd done everything possible to stay hidden. He turned back to the diary, reading entry after entry. Claire's words painted a picture he'd never fully seen before. Her fears about the Sterling legacy, her anxiety about raising a child under the spotlight of wealth and expectation. Her deep discussions with Emma about what truly mattered in raising a child. And then he found it, the last entry written the day before she went into labor. My dearest Alexander, if you ever read this, please understand. Our world, our name, our legacy. It's too heavy a burden for an innocent child. Emma understands what it means to be loved for who you are, not what you're expected to be. If anything happens to me, trust her. She'll give our daughter what I never had, the freedom to just be herself. Alexander sat back, Claire's words echoing in his mind. For the first time, he saw the past through her eyes. He'd been so focused on maintaining the Sterling legacy, on planning their daughter's future, that he'd missed his wife's growing desperation. He looked at the recent photo of Lily from the boutique's security camera. She was laughing, uninhibited, and joyful, twirling in the blue dress that had meant so much to generations of Sterling women. But unlike those formal portraits of the past, her joy was real, unrestrained by protocol or tradition. Emma hadn't stolen his daughter, he realized. She'd kept a promise to Claire, a promise to give their child a chance at a normal life, filled with love rather than obligation. His computer chimed with an alert. The background check he'd requested on Emma Thompson had found something. A small apartment lease signed 7 years ago with a co-signer's name that made his heart stop. Sister Mary Catherine from St. Michael's Hospital. The same sister. Mary Catherine, who had been Claire's confidant during her pregnancy, who had been on duty the night everything changed, who might have the answers to questions he'd carried for 7 years. Alexander reached for his coat. It was late, but he knew the hospital's chapel held evening prayers, and if his memory served him correctly, Sister Mary Catherine still led them every night. St. Michael's Hospital Chapel stood quiet in the foyer, late evening hours, its stained glass windows casting colored shadows across empty pews. Alexander paused at the entrance, memories washing over him. Countless nights spent here during Claire's difficult pregnancy, praying for the safety of his wife and unborn child. Sister Mary Catherine knelt before the altar, her silver hair visible beneath her veil, her prayers a whispered melody in the silence. She didn't turn when Alexander's footsteps echoed through the chapel, but her shoulders tensed slightly as if she'd been expecting this moment for years. I wondered when you would come, she said softly, still facing the altar. When Emma called earlier tonight, I knew it wouldn't be long. Alexander stopped halfway down the aisle. Then you've been in contact with her all these years? The elderly nun finally turned, her face serene but her eyes filled with emotion. Only when she needed help finding safe places to stay. Only when Lily was sick and needed medical attention they couldn't afford. Only when the burden of her promise to Claire became too heavy to bear alone. Tell me everything, Alexander said, his voice barely a whisper. Please, I need to understand. Sister Mary Catherine gestured to the front pew, and they sat together in the dim light of flickering candles. Claire came to me first, she began, her voice taking on the rhythm of long-held memories. She was 3 months pregnant and terrified, not of motherhood, but of what the Sterling name would mean for her child. She'd seen how the pressure of legacy had affected you, Alexander, how it had shaped your every decision, your every interaction. Alexander wanted to protest, but the truth of her words stopped him. How many times had he spoken to Claire's pregnant belly about responsibility, about duty, about upholding the sterling tradition? She found a kindred spirit in Emma, the nun, continued. A young nurse who understood what it meant to long for simple love, uncomplicated by expectations. They would talk for hours in the hospital garden, Claire sharing her fears, Emma sharing stories of children she'd cared for who thrived on nothing but love and encouragement. She paused, reaching into her pocket to withdraw a worn envelope. Claire left this with me to give to you if the truth ever came to light. Her last letter, written the night before. Alexander took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, he found a single page covered in Claire's elegant handwriting. My dearest Alexander, by the time you read this, you will know what I've done, what I asked Emma to do. Please understand, it wasn't about you, not really. It was about the weight we place on our children before they even take their first breath. I watched you plan our daughter's entire life while she was still growing inside me. The best schools, the right social connections, the carefully chosen activities to shape her into a proper sterling heir. Your love was never in question, but your vision for her future left no room for her to create her own path. Emma showed me another way. Through her, I saw the possibility of our daughter growing up free to discover herself, to make mistakes, to be ordinary or extraordinary on her own terms. When complications arose during delivery, I made my choice. I asked Emma to give our daughter something we never had, the chance to be loved for herself, not her name. I know you've searched for her. I know you've suffered. But look closely at the life Emma has given her. Look at her joy, her spirit, her ability to love freely. Then ask yourself, would she have had that within the gilded cage of the sterling legacy? I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I couldn't bear to watch you discover the truth and not understand why. But now perhaps you're ready to see what I saw then, that the greatest gift we can give our children is the freedom to become who they're meant to be, not who we think they should be. Forgive Emma. She acted out of love. Love for our daughter and love for the friend who begged her to provide an escape. And forgive me for believing that sometimes love means making impossible choices. Forever yours, Claire. Alexander looked up from the letter to find Sister Mary Catherine watching him with gentle understanding. Claire knew, he said slowly. She knew there would be complications during the delivery. The nun nodded. Her condition was deteriorating. The doctors had warned her that either she or the baby might not survive. She made her choice. She would ensure her daughter's survival and freedom with her last act of motherhood. And Emma? She agreed to this? Not at first. She struggled with the decision, knowing what it would mean for you. But Claire was persuasive, and Emma understood too well what it meant to grow up without the freedom to just be a child. In the end, her promise to Claire became her life's purpose, giving your daughter the childhood Claire dreamed of. Alexander stood, moving to the stained glass window where he and Claire had often sat together. All these years I thought someone had stolen our baby out of malice. I never imagined, never considered, that it was an act of love, Sister Mary Catherine finished gently. Both Claire and Emma loved that child enough to make impossible choices. And now, Alexander Sterling, you face your own impossible choice. What will you do with the truth? While Alexander sat in the chapel learning the truth from Sister Mary Catherine, Emma stood at her apartment window, watching the city lights flicker like earthbound stars. Lily's new clothes lay carefully folded on the coffee table, each item a reminder of the afternoon that had changed everything. The sound of Lily's steady breathing drifted from the bedroom, punctuated by occasional murmurs as she dreamed. Emma wondered what memories were surfacing in her daughter's sleeping mind, what echoes of her earliest days were finally breaking through the careful walls she'd built around them. She picked up one of the dresses Alexander had insisted on buying, running her fingers over the fine fabric. The price tag she'd caught a glimpse of could have covered their rent for 2 months. Yet it wasn't the extravagance that troubled her. It was the care with which he'd chosen each item, the way he'd noticed Lily's preferences before even she had. He deserves to know, she whispered to the empty room, voicing the thought she'd been fighting all evening. Claire was wrong about him. Her phone lay on the table, Sister Mary Catherine's words from their earlier conversation still echoing in her mind. "Emma, dear, I've watched Alexander Sterling all these years. The man Claire feared would stifle his daughter's spirit has become someone else entirely, someone who understands the true value of love over legacy." Emma moved to Lily's room, drawn by a sudden need to see her daughter. In sleep, Lily's face held echoes of both her parents, Claire's delicate features, softened by Alexander's gentle smile. The moonlight caught the silver chain around her neck, the one possession Emma had kept from that night. Claire's locket, now Lily's most treasured belonging, though she didn't know its true significance. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear despite the years. "Take this," Claire had whispered, pressing the locket into Emma's hand. "Give it to her when she's old enough to ask about her past." Inside are the words I wish I had time to tell her myself. Emma had never opened it, honoring Claire's wish that Lily be the first to read the message within. But she'd given it to Lily on her 7th birthday, watching as her daughter immediately claimed it, as if recognizing something deep in her soul. Now, she carefully lifted the locket from Lily's neck, holding it up to the moonlight. It bore the same crescent moon design as the birthmark they all shared: Claire, Alexander, Lily, and even herself. The realization made her pause. Her own crescent-shaped birthmark, so similar to the Sterling family trait, had been one of the reasons Claire had trusted her with Lily. A sign, Claire had called it, that you were meant to be part of this story. Emma sat on the edge of Lily's bed, overwhelmed by the weight of 7 years of secrets. She'd spent so long focusing on what Claire had feared, the suffocating expectations of the Sterling name, that she'd almost missed what was right in front of her. A father who had never stopped searching, who had transformed his pain into kindness, who looked at Lily with pure love untainted by any thought of legacy or tradition. Lily stirred in her sleep, mumbling something that sounded like the old lullaby, Claire's lullaby. Emma's heart clenched. The memories were returning, becoming clearer each day. Soon they would be too strong to dismiss as dreams. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sister Mary Catherine. "He knows, Emma. He's here at the chapel, and he understands. Truly, understands why you both did what you did. It's time to stop running." Emma's hands trembled as she read the message. In her mind, she could see Alexander in the chapel, where she'd spent so many nights talking with Claire, where she'd made the promise that had shaped the last 7 years of her life. Would he be angry? Would he try to take Lily away, or would he... Another text appeared. "He's asking the right questions now, Emma. Not about the Sterling legacy, but about Lily's happiness, about what's best for her. Claire would be proud of the man he's become." Emma looked down at her sleeping daughter, so peaceful, so unaware of the revelations unfolding around her. Tomorrow would bring changes they couldn't predict, conversations they couldn't prepare for. But for now, in this quiet moment between secrets and truth, she finally allowed herself to imagine a future where Lily could have both: the freedom Claire had wished for her, and the father's love she'd never known she was missing. "Sweet dreams, little one," she whispered, carefully replacing the locket around Lily's neck. "Tomorrow we start writing a new chapter of our story." Dawn was just breaking over the city when Emma heard the soft knock at her door. She'd been awake all night, waiting for this moment, knowing it would come. Through the peephole, she saw Alexander Sterling standing in the hallway, still wearing his suit from the previous day, Claire's letter visible in his hand. She opened the door slowly, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent understanding. Without a word, she stepped aside to let him in. "Is she asleep?" Alexander asked softly, his voice carrying none of the anger she'd feared, only a gentle weariness that matched her own. Emma nodded. "She usually sleeps late on Saturdays." She gestured to the small kitchen table. "Would you like some coffee?" "I make it the same way Claire taught me, with a pinch of cardamom." Alexander's breath caught at the casual mention of his wife's name, at this small detail he'd almost forgotten. "Yes," he managed. "Yes, I would." They moved around each other in the tiny kitchen with careful awareness, like dancers learning a new routine. Emma pulled out Claire's old coffee recipe card, worn and stained but still legible, and Alexander's eyes followed her movements with recognition. "You kept everything, didn't you?" he asked as she set 2 mugs on the table, all the little pieces of her. "For Lily," Emma replied, sitting across from him, "so that one day, when she was ready, she would know who she really was, who her mother was." Alexander placed Claire's letter on the table between them. "Sister Mary Catherine gave me this. She told me everything." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I need to hear it from you, Emma. I need to understand." Emma wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, drawing strength from its warmth. "Where should I start?" "The beginning," Alexander said gently. "The real beginning." Emma took a deep breath. "I was fresh out of nursing school, assigned to the maternity ward. Claire was my first long-term patient. She was different from the other wealthy patients. She actually saw me, talked to me, asked about my life. When she learned I'd grown up in foster care, something changed between us. We started having these long conversations about what it means to truly love a child." She glanced toward Lily's room, then back to Alexander. Claire was scared, but not of motherhood. She was terrified of what the Sterling name would mean for her baby. She'd watch you come in with tutors' resumes, preschool applications, plans for trust funds, and each time she'd cry after you left. "I thought I was being responsible," Alexander said softly, "preparing for our daughter's future." "You were," Emma assured him. "But Claire, she saw something different. She saw a life planned out before it even began, a path chosen without the chance to choose another." She hesitated, then continued. "She made me promise, long before that night, that if anything happened to her, I would make sure your daughter had the chance to just be herself first, before being a Sterling." Alexander's hands tightened around his mug, and when complications arose during delivery, "Claire knew she wouldn't survive," Emma's voice cracked. "The doctors had told her weeks before, but she'd sworn them to secrecy. She had everything planned, the documents I would need, the places I could go, even the story about the baby being taken. She made her choice, Alexander. Her last gift to your daughter was the freedom to grow up without the weight of legacy." "And you've spent 7 years running," Alexander observed, no judgment in his voice. "Living on the edge of poverty, working in diners, moving whenever anyone got too close. All to keep a promise to Claire." Emma nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I never spent any of the money she left for us except for emergencies. I wanted Lily to understand the value of things, to know what it means to work hard and earn what you have. You wanted exactly what any good parent wants," Alexander finished, "for their child to grow into who they truly are." A small sound from the hallway made them both turn. Lily stood there in her pajamas, Claire's locket glinting at her throat, her eyes wide as she looked between them. "I had another dream," she said, her voice small but sure. "About the lady singing, about my other mommy. It wasn't a dream, was it?" Emma and Alexander exchanged a look, years of secrets and pain and love passing between them in an instant. Then Alexander held out his hand, his voice gentle. "No, sweetheart, it wasn't just a dream. Would you like to hear about her? About your mother, Claire?" Lily moved forward slowly, drawn by something she couldn't name but had always felt. She took Alexander's hand, then reached for Emma's with her other one. In that moment, as the morning sun streamed through the window, they formed a circle of truth and healing. The father who had never stopped loving, the guardian who had sacrificed everything to keep a promise, and the child who had always carried both their hearts within, her own. "The locket," Lily said suddenly, touching it with her free hand. "It has the same moon as our birthmarks, as your birthmark," she looked at Alexander. "That's why it always felt special." "Yes," Emma said softly. "It was your mother's last gift to you. She wrote you a message inside, but made me promise you would be the first to read it when you were ready." Lily's fingers closed around the locket. "I'm ready now," she whispered. Will you stay with me while I open it?" Alexander and Emma exchanged another look, this one full of hope and possibility. "We're not going anywhere," Alexander promised. "We're all exactly where we need to be." The morning sun filled the small apartment kitchen with golden light as Lily sat between Emma and Alexander, the locket trembling in her small hands. For 7 years, it had hung around her neck, a constant companion she'd somehow known was more than just a piece of jewelry. Now finally, its secrets were about to be revealed. "It's okay to be nervous," Emma said softly, squeezing her hand. "Sometimes the most important moments in our lives are the scariest." Alexander watched his daughter, trace the crescent moon design on the locket's surface. She had Claire's delicate touch, the same way of handling precious things, with reverence and care. "Take your time, sweetheart. We're here." Lily took a deep breath and carefully opened the clasp. Inside, folded impossibly small, was a piece of pale blue paper, the same shade as the dress she'd tried on in Alexander's store. As she unfolded it, a pressed forget-me-not flower fluttered to the table. "Her favorite flower," Alexander and Emma said simultaneously, then shared a small smile over Lily's head. Lily smoothed out the paper, Claire's elegant handwriting flowing across the page in silver ink that caught the morning light. "My dearest daughter, if you're reading this, it means you're ready to know the truth about who you are and how very loved you've always been. I'm your mother, Claire, and I'm writing this while you're still growing beneath my heart, kicking and dancing to let me know you're there. Your father, Alexander, sits beside me as I write, planning wonderful things for your future because he loves you so completely. And Emma, my dearest friend, brings me tea and shares stories of all the amazing things you might become. You are surrounded by love, my darling, different kinds of love, but all of them true. I won't be there to see you grow up, my sweet one. This is my choice, my final gift to you. I'm giving you something I never had, the freedom to discover yourself without the weight of expectations, to find your own path before inheriting one. The crescent moon you wear behind your ear is more than a family birthmark. It's a reminder that even when things seem dark, light will always return. Your father has it, and his father before him, all the way back through the Sterling line. It marks you as part of a legacy of strength and determination. But remember, the moon doesn't shine because it's told to. It shines because that's what it was born to do. I've asked Emma to give you something precious, a childhood filled with simple joys, with scraped knees and ice cream cones, with the chance to dream your own dreams. And I've asked her to protect you until you're ready to know your father, Alexander, a key man whose heart is so big he spent years preparing a place for you in it. The Sterling name will always be part of who you are, but it isn't all you are. You're also the little girl who kicks to Mozart and settles to lullabies. You're the baby who hiccups when Emma tells funny stories. You're the daughter I loved enough to give wings to before you even learned to walk. Don't be angry with Emma for keeping these secrets. She promised me she would give you time to become yourself before you learned about being a Sterling. And don't be angry with your father for all his plans and dreams. They came from a place of pure love, even if he sometimes forgot that the greatest gift we can give our children is the freedom to surprise us. My darling daughter, you have two parents who would move mountains for you, Emma, who has given up everything to keep her promise to me, and Alexander, who has never stopped hoping he would find you. Now it's time for all of you to learn what I've known all along, that love doesn't divide when it's shared, it multiplies. The forget-me-not pressed within this locket bloomed in the hospital garden where Emma and I first became friends, where your father would bring me fresh flowers every morning, where we all dreamed of who you might become. Keep it as a reminder that even the smallest things can hold the greatest meaning. You are loved, my darling girl. You always have been and you always will be, by your father who has waited so patiently, by Emma who has protected you so fiercely, and by me, your mother, who chose to give you the world before giving you a name. Be happy, be free, be yourself. All my love, Mommy Claire. Lily looked up from the letter, tears streaming down her face. I remember the lullaby now, she whispered. The one about the moon and stars. You both used to sing it to me, you and Mommy Claire. Emma brushed away her own tears. She taught it to me during those long nights in the hospital. She said it had been in the Sterling family for generations. It has, Alexander confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. My mother sang it to me and her mother before her. He hesitated, then began to sing softly, the familiar melody filling the kitchen. Little moonchild dancing in light, stars in your eyes, making dreams take flight. Lily joined in, the words rising from some deep place in her memory. Sleep, now my darling, safe in love's embrace while silver moonbeams light your sweet face. Emma completed the verse, her voice harmonizing with theirs just as it had with Claire's so many years ago. For you are loved by stars up above, and here on earth you're wrapped in our love. The last note hung in the air like a promise fulfilled. Lily looked between Emma and Alexander, her face bright with understanding. I have 3 parents who love me, she said wonderingly. Mommy Emma, who kept me safe and helped me grow. Mommy Claire, who gave me the chance to be me, and Daddy. The word hung in the air for a moment before Alexander gathered her into his arms. 7 years of longing poured into a single embrace. Emma watched them, her heart full, until Lily reached out and pulled her into the hug too. We're all exactly where we need to be, Lily repeated Alexander's earlier words, wisdom beyond her years in her voice. Mommy Claire knew we would be, didn't she? That's why she gave us time to find our way here. Through the window, the morning sun caught the forget-me-not on the table, making it glow like a tiny blue star. And somewhere, they all felt, Claire was smiling, knowing her last and greatest gift had finally bloomed into something more beautiful than she could have imagined. A family bound not by duty or tradition, but by the purest kind of love. The Chi. Next few days passed in a gentle blur of adjustments and discoveries. Alexander had offered them rooms in his mansion, but Emma and Lily had decided to stay in their apartment for now, a decision he respected, understanding the importance of taking things slowly. Instead, he found himself spending every free moment in their small but welcoming home, learning the rhythms of his daughter's life. Daddy, look, Lily called from her tiny bedroom, where she was showing Alexander her collection of borrowed library books. This one's my favorite. Mommy Emma reads it to me every Sunday. Alexander sat on the edge of her bed, taking the well-worn copy of The Secret Garden in his hands. Your mother Claire loved this book too. She had a first edition in her study. Really? Lily's eyes lit up. Can we see it sometime? Of course. He smiled, then noticed Emma hovering in the doorway. Perhaps we could all go this weekend. The house, it should be your home too whenever you're ready. Emma moved into the room, sitting beside Lily. What do you think, sweetheart? Would you like to see where your mommy Claire lived? Lily nodded enthusiastically, then grew thoughtful. But we'll come back here too, right? I like our apartment. And Betty at the diner would miss us. Speaking of Betty, Alexander said carefully, I had a thought about that. He looked at Emma. I know you've built a life here, friends and connections I don't want to disrupt, but the diner, Betty's been struggling to keep it open, hasn't she? Emma's surprise showed on her face. How did you know? I may have done some research, he admitted. And I had an idea. Not charity, he added quickly, seeing her expression. An investment. Betty's food is excellent, her location is perfect, and with some minor renovations and marketing. You want to help save the diner? Emma asked softly. I want to help preserve something that matters to both of you, he corrected. And perhaps we could add a small bookstore cafe next door? I noticed the empty space is for lease. Lily could have her own reading corner, and you, Emma. You mentioned once to Claire that you dreamed of running a bookshop someday. Emma's eyes filled with tears. You remembered that? From Claire's diary. I remember everything now, he said quietly. All the dreams she shared with you, all the hopes you both had. I'd like to help make some of them come true if you'll let me. Lily looked between them, then reached for the locket around her neck. Mommy Claire would like that, wouldn't she? Having all the things we love together in one place. Yes, Emma smiled, touching the locket gently. I think she would. The rest of the evening passed in comfortable domesticity. Alexander stayed for dinner, watching in amazement as Lily and Emma moved around their tiny kitchen with practiced coordination, preparing a simple but delicious meal. They had their own traditions, he realized, Lily setting the table with careful precision, Emma humming softly as she cooked, both of them sharing stories about their day. After dinner, as they sat together on the small balcony watching the sunset, Lily asked the question that had been on her mind. Can we make a garden like in the book? Not a secret one, but one where we can grow forget-me-nots like Mommy Claire's? Alexander and Emma exchanged glances. Actually, he said, there's something I'd like to show you both tomorrow. The mansion has a greenhouse that's been closed since Claire left. I think it's time to bring it back to life. With forget-me-nots? Lily asked hopefully. With forget-me-nots, he confirmed, and any other flowers you'd like to grow. It can be your special project, yours and Emma's. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Emma and Alexander sat talking quietly over cups of Claire's cardamom coffee. The night air was cool, but neither wanted to end this peaceful moment. Thank you, Emma said suddenly, for understanding. About the apartment, about taking things slowly, for not trying to change everything at once. Alexander looked at her thoughtfully. You know, I spent 7 years thinking I needed to find my daughter and reclaim the life that was taken from us. But now I realize that you didn't take our life away. You and Claire gave Lily the chance to create her own life. And now maybe we can all build something new together, something that honors the past but isn't bound by it. Emma smiled, remembering Claire's words in the letter. Love doesn't divide when it's shared, it multiplies. Exactly, Alexander agreed. And speaking of sharing, he pulled out an envelope from his jacket. I had my lawyers draw something up. It's not final, just a draft, but it's about making you Lily's legal guardian, officially. No matter what happens, no one can ever question your place in her life. Emma took the envelope with trembling hands but didn't open it. Some gifts were too precious to rush. Instead, she said what she'd been feeling all evening. She would be so proud of you, Alexander, of how you've opened your heart to change. She'd be proud of both of us, he replied softly, for finding our way here, for putting Lily first, for learning that family isn't about blood or names or traditions, it's about love in all its unexpected forms. As if to underscore his words, Lily's voice drifted from her room, singing Claire's lullaby in her sleep. Emma and Alexander sat in comfortable silence, listening to their daughter's sweet voice carrying the melody that had brought them all together, each thinking about the greenhouse waiting to be restored, the bookstore waiting to be born, and all the new traditions they would create together. The Sterling mansion looked different in the morning light, less imposing, more inviting, as if the building itself sensed the change in its master's heart. Emma and Lily stood at the wrought iron gates, taking in the sight that had haunted Emma's dreams for 7 years. Ready? Alexander asked softly, standing between them. Lily slipped one hand into his and the other into Emma's. It feels like I've been here before, she said wonderingly. In my dreams, but not dreams. Memories? Emma explained gently. You were born here, sweetheart. This was your first home. As they walked up the tree-lined drive, Alexander pointed out different features. The old oak tree perfect for climbing, the hidden paths through the gardens, the window of what had been Claire's study. Emma noticed he'd removed the formal family portraits from the entrance hall, replacing them with brighter, more welcoming artwork. I've been making some changes, he explained, catching her look. The house needed to breathe, to feel less like a museum and more like a home. They moved through the house slowly, allowing Lily to explore at her own pace. She was drawn to certain rooms, certain objects, as if some deep part of her remembered them. In Claire's study, she went straight to the bookshelf where the first edition of The Secret Garden waited. It smells like sunshine, she said, carefully opening its pages. And something else, something familiar. Lavender, Emma and Alexander said together. Emma continued, Claire always kept dried lavender in her books. She said it made reading feel like walking through a garden. Alexander watched as Lily settled into Claire's old reading chair, the book open on her lap, looking so much like her mother that his heart ached with joy rather than pain for the first time in years. There's something else I'd like to show. You both, he said, something special. He led them through French doors onto a stone path that wound through overgrown gardens. At its end stood the greenhouse, a Victorian masterpiece of glass and iron, its windows clouded with years of neglect, but its structure still sound and beautiful. Claire's sanctuary, Emma breathed, remembering the hours she'd spent here with her friend, planning and dreaming. Alexander produced an old key from his pocket. I haven't opened it since everything changed, but yesterday something told me it was time. The door creaked open, releasing the musty scent of dormant earth and forgotten green things. Dusty sunlight filtered through the glass, illuminating empty planters and dry fountains. But there, in a corner pot nearly hidden by fallen leaves, a splash of blue caught their eyes. "Forget-me-nots," Lily whispered, moving closer. "They're still alive." Indeed, a small cluster of the delicate flowers had survived against all odds, their tiny blue petals exactly matching the ones pressed in Claire's locket. "Claire always said they were survivors," Emma remembered, touching the flowers gently. "That they could bloom anywhere if you just gave them a chance." "Like us," Lily said with 7-year-old wisdom. "We're all survivors too, aren't we? And now we can bloom together." Alexander cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. "I have something else to show you." He moved to a weathered wooden cabinet, pulling out old gardening journals bound in leather. Claire kept records of everything she planted, and look, he opened one to a carefully drawn plan. She designed a children's garden, with paths sized for little feet, and plants chosen for their stories as much as their beauty. "Can we build it?" Lily asked eagerly. "All of us together?" "Yes," he smiled. "In fact, I've already ordered the supplies. But first, we need to clear the space and prepare the soil. It's going to take time and hard work." "The best things usually do," Emma said softly. They spent the rest of the morning making plans, not just for the garden, but for life. Alexander showed them the rooms he'd prepared, letting Lily choose which one she wanted for her occasional stays. Emma found herself drawn to Claire's old art room, with its perfect light for reading and writing. "The bookstore plans are here," Alexander said, spreading blueprints on a table. "I thought maybe you could help design it, Emma. Make it exactly as you've dreamed it." "And the diner?" she asked. "Betty's meeting with the contractors tomorrow. She's excited about the renovations, especially the new kitchen equipment. She says she's been wanting to expand her menu for years." Lily, who had been examining Claire's garden plans, looked up. "Can we have a reading garden at the bookstore too? A small one with benches and flowers?" "Of course," Emma smiled. "And maybe we could name it after your mommy Claire." "Claire's garden," Alexander mused. "Her place where stories and flowers grow together. She would have loved that." As they continued planning, the greenhouse seemed to come alive around them. Dust motes danced in sunbeams, and the forget-me-nots turned their tiny faces toward the light. Through the glass panels, they could see the garden waiting to be restored, its wild beauty ready to be shaped into something new while honoring what had come before. "You know," Lily said thoughtfully, holding Claire's gardening journal, "Mommy Claire gave us all seeds to plant, love seeds like in my story, and now they're finally growing into something beautiful." Emma and Alexander exchanged glances over their daughter's head, understanding the truth in her simple observation. They were all seeds of Claire's love, the daughter she'd protected, the friend she'd trusted, the husband she'd challenged to grow, and now, like the persistent forget-me-nots blooming against all odds, they had found their way to flourish together. The transformation of Betty's diner happened gradually over the next few weeks, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. The renovations were subtle but significant. New kitchen equipment that made Betty's eyes sparkle with culinary possibilities, comfortable booths upholstered in warm colors, and large windows that let in streams of natural light. But most importantly, the heart of the place remained unchanged. "It's perfect," Betty declared, watching her regular customers explore the renovated space. "Still feels like home, just better." She turned to Emma, who was arranging fresh flowers on the counter, forget-me-nots, of course, grown in Claire's greenhouse. "You and your Alexander, you understood what this place means to people." Emma smiled at the phrase, "your Alexander," which somehow captured the unique relationship they were building. Not romantic, but deeply connected through their shared love for Lily and Claire's memory. "He's good at seeing the potential in things," she said, "in places, in people, in family," Betty finished, watching through the window as Alexander and Lily examined the construction next door. The future bookstore was taking shape, its large display windows already inspiring curious glances from passers-by. Lily had thrown herself into both projects with enthusiastic dedication. She'd appointed herself official taste tester for Betty's expanded menu and head designer for the bookstore's children's section. Now she stood with Alexander, clutching Claire's old sketchbook where they'd been planning the reading garden. The fountain should go there, they heard her explain as they came through the diner's door. Mommy Claire drew one just like it in her garden plan, see? And we can put benches around it so people can read outside when it's sunny. An excellent suggestion, Alexander agreed, then smiled at Emma. She has her mother's eye for design, both her mothers actually. I saw your old sketches for a bookshop when we were cleaning out the greenhouse storage room. Emma blushed. She'd forgotten about those drawings, made during long afternoons with Claire when they'd shared their dreams. I can't believe you kept them. Claire kept everything that mattered, Alexander said softly, and now they're helping us build something new. Betty watched their interaction with knowing eyes. You know, she said to no one in particular, some people spend their whole lives trying to find where they belong, and others, she gestured to the three of them, others create belonging wherever they go. The bell above the diner's door chimed as Sister Mary Catherine entered, her eyes twinkling at the sight of them all together. She'd become a regular visitor, watching with quiet joy as the family she'd helped protect blossomed into something beautiful. I brought something for the bookstore, she announced, pulling a carefully wrapped package from her bag. Found it in the hospital chapel's old library. It was a first-edition collection of children's prayers and lullabies, including the Sterling family's moon song. The inscription inside read, "To Claire, who taught me that love is the greatest prayer we can offer. May your child grow up knowing both earthly and heavenly love." This was my grandmother's gift to Claire, Alexander realized, touching the faded inscription. She gave it to her the day we told her we were expecting. And now it can be the first book in your family reading room, Sister Mary Catherine smiled. A piece of history to bless your new beginning. The idea of a family reading room had been Lily's, a special space in the bookstore where parents and children could share stories together. She'd insisted on comfortable chairs big enough for families of all sizes, as she put it, because sometimes families grow in unexpected ways, she'd explained with the simple wisdom that often took their breath away, like ours did. Now, as they sat in their usual booth at the diner, sharing Betty's famous hot chocolate, made with Alexander's family recipe, a collaboration that delighted their customers, they could see their shared vision taking shape. Through the window, the bookstore's sign was being installed, Claire's Corner Books and Garden. Look, Lily pointed excitedly, they're putting up the moon and stars. Indeed, the sign featured a delicate crescent moon surrounded by stars, echoing the birthmark they all shared. It's more than a bookstore, Emma said softly. It's a testament to Claire's love, to the power of stories to bring people together. To the family we lost, the family we found and the family we built, Alexander added, raising his hot chocolate in a toast. Betty brought over a plate of her new specialty, sunshine cookies, made from Claire's recipe that Emma had remembered and shared. On the house, she announced, for the people who saved not just my diner but the heart of our little community. As they enjoyed their treats, customers came and went, each adding their own warmth to the atmosphere. The diner had always been a sanctuary of sorts, but now it felt like something more, a bridge between past and present, between different kinds of love, between what was lost and what was found. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through both buildings, connecting them like pieces of a story finally coming together. In the bookstore space, workers were installing the custom shelves Alexander had designed based on Emma's old drawings. In the diner, Betty was teaching her cooks the Sterling family's hot chocolate recipe, adding her own special touch. And in the garden space between, the first shoots of Claire's beloved forget-me-nots were pushing through the soil, reaching for the light. The greenhouse transformation had been a labor of love spanning several weekends. Now, on a bright Sunday morning, it stood ready for its grand reopening. The glass panels sparkled in the sunlight, each one carefully cleaned and repaired. Inside, Claire's garden plans had come to life through their combined efforts. Emma stood in the doorway, taking in the scene before her. Lily was carefully misting the newly planted flowers, wearing overalls that matched the ones in an old photo of Claire they'd found in the gardening journals. Alexander worked nearby, installing the final piece of the irrigation system he'd designed to maintain the perfect growing conditions. "Mommy Emma, look!" Lily called out excitedly. "The moonflowers we planted last week are starting to climb." She pointed to delicate vines beginning to wind their way up the special trellises Alexander had crafted, each one shaped like a crescent moon. "Your mother Claire loved moonflowers," Alexander said, standing to admire their progress. "She said they reminded her that beautiful things can bloom even in darkness." Emma moved to join them, breathing in the rich scent of fertile soil and growing things. The greenhouse had become their special place, where they spent weekends working together, sharing stories, and watching life spring from their combined care. "I found something else while organizing the garden shed," Alexander said, retrieving a weathered wooden box. I think Claire meant for us to find it together." Inside the box lay a collection of carefully preserved items, pressed flowers from significant moments in Claire's life, photographs of her throughout her pregnancy, and letters she'd written but never sent, one addressed to each of them. "She knew," Emma whispered, touching the envelopes gently. "Somehow she knew we'd find our way here." Lily picked up a pressed forget-me-not that had been placed atop the letters. "Can we read them in our special spot?" Their special spot was a cozy corner of the greenhouse they'd created together, a curved bench surrounded by Claire's favorite flowers, with a small fountain providing gentle background music. They settled there, the morning sun warming them through the glass, as Alexander carefully opened the first letter. "My dearest family," Claire's words flowed over them. "If you're reading this, then everything I hoped for has come to pass. You found each other, and more importantly, you found a way to become something new together." The letter went on to share her dreams for them, not just as individuals, but as the unique and beautiful family she'd imagined they could be. She wrote of seeing Alexander's capacity for change, of recognizing in Emma a heart big enough to love a child not her own, of knowing that Lily would inherit the best of all of them. "The greenhouse was always my favorite place," she wrote, "because it taught me that growth requires both roots and wings. You need strong roots to weather life's storms, but you also need the freedom to stretch toward the light in your own way. That's what I wanted for all of you, the strength of connection and the freedom to grow." As they read, sunlight played through the stained glass panels they'd installed at the greenhouse's peak, another element from Claire's original plans. The light cast rainbow patterns across their faces, across the letters, across the thriving plants that surrounded them. "Look," Lily said suddenly, pointing to where the morning light hit the water in the fountain. A perfect rainbow arched through, the spray creating a bridge between the forget-me-nots on one side and the moonflowers on the other. "It's like Mommy Claire is painting with light." Emma and Alexander shared a smile at their daughter's perception. In so many ways, Claire was still with them, her love manifesting in these quiet moments of beauty and connection. "There's one more thing," Alexander said, reaching into the box again. He pulled out a small packet of seeds, labeled in Claire's elegant handwriting, "For the future, plant when the time is right." The packet contained a rare variety of rose that Claire had been developing, one that combined the deep blue of forget-me-nots with the luminous white of moonflowers. According to her notes, she'd been trying to create a flower that captured the magic of both day and night, of endings and beginnings, of different kinds of love growing together. "I think," Emma said softly, "the time is right now. We could plant them here, and when they bloom, we can share them," Lily finished enthusiastically. "Some for the greenhouse, some for the bookstore garden, and some for our apartment balcony. That way they'll connect all our homes together." Alexander opened the seed packet carefully. Claire would love that idea, creating something new that honors the past while celebrating the present. Together, they prepared a special planter, each adding a handful of soil, each making space for the seeds to grow. As they worked, sunlight caught the matching crescents behind their ears, making them shimmer like real moons. "You know what this reminds me of?" Lily asked, patting the soil gently around the planted seeds. That part in The Secret Garden where Mary says, "If you look the right way, you can see that the whole world is a garden." Emma and Alexander exchanged glances over their daughter's head, once again struck by her ability to find the perfect words for a moment. "She's right," Emma said. "Our whole world has become a garden, growing, changing, blooming in unexpected ways. And the best part," Alexander added, wrapping an arm around each of them, "is that we get to tend it together." Above them, the morning light continued to paint rainbows through the greenhouse glass, blessing their newly planted seeds with promises of beautiful things to come. In that moment, they were more than 3 people brought together by circumstance. They were a family rooted in love, growing toward tomorrow. The grand opening of Claire's Corner Books and Garden dawned bright and clear, as if the weather itself was celebrating with them. Emma stood in the center of the bookstore, taking in the scene they'd created together. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating shelves lined with carefully chosen books. The family reading room, with its oversized chairs and magical woodland theme, waited to welcome its first young readers. Lily darted around excitedly, making last-minute adjustments to her special project, hand-drawn bookmarks featuring forget-me-nots and crescent moons, which would be given to the first 100 customers. She wore a new dress that somehow managed to bridge the gap between her 2 worlds, elegant enough to please the Sterling family traditions, but comfortable enough for a child to climb trees in. "The roses are blooming," she announced, running in from the garden. "The special ones from Mommy Claire's seeds. They opened just in time." Alexander and Emma followed her out to see the miracle for themselves. The roses Claire had created were even more beautiful than they'd imagined. Their petals a subtle blend of forget-me-not blue and moonflower white, with a silvery sheen that seemed to capture both daylight and starlight. "Perfect timing," Betty said, appearing with a tray of fresh-baked treats for the opening celebration. "Just like Claire, making sure everything's exactly right for the big day." The garden that connected the bookstore to the diner had become a neighborhood sensation even before its official opening. Local children pressed their faces against the fence daily, watching the progress of the fountain installation, the placement of reading benches, and the growth of the magical flowers that seemed to have appeared overnight. "Remember, sister," Mary Catherine had said when they were planning the space, "a garden, like a family, needs room to grow wild sometimes. Don't make it too perfect." They'd taken her advice to heart. While the paths were neatly laid and the benches strategically placed, they'd left areas where nature could take its course. The result was a space that felt both designed and organic, much like their family itself. As the morning progressed, people began to gather. Betty's regular customers mixed with Sterling family friends, creating an atmosphere that bridged both worlds. Alexander's business associates found themselves chatting with Emma's diner regulars, sharing stories over cups of the famous hot chocolate that was now served in both establishments. Lily had insisted on doing the ribbon cutting herself, and now she stood ready, oversized scissors in hand. But before she made the cut, she had something to say. "This place," she began, her clear voice carrying across the crowd, "is special because it's like my family. It has books like Mommy Emma loves and flowers like Mommy Claire loved, and it helps people like Daddy loves to do. And it's a place where everyone can find their own special story." She looked at her parents, both Emma and Alexander, who nodded encouragingly. Mommy Claire wrote in her letter that love doesn't divide when you share it. It grows bigger, like her special roses. So we made this place big enough for everyone's love to grow. The diner where people can share meals and make friends. The bookstore where they can find new stories. And the garden where everything comes together. Emma felt tears in her eyes as their daughter continued, speaking from her heart with wisdom, beyond her years. "In my favorite book, The Secret Garden, Mary finds a key that opens a door to magic. But my Mommy Claire knew something even better. She knew that love is the best key of all. It opened the door for our family to find each other, and now we want to share that magic with everyone." With that, she cut the ribbon and Claire's Corner Books and Garden officially opened its doors. People streamed in, exclaiming over the thoughtful details that filled every corner. The children's section, with its star-painted ceiling and reading, nooks shaped like tree houses, quickly filled with excited young voices. In the garden, visitors discovered little treasures Lily had insisted on including: tiny fairy doors at the base of trees, wind chimes that played the notes of Claire's lullaby, and mosaic stepping stones featuring crescent moons and forget-me-nots. Betty's new outdoor cafe seating area, nestled among the flowers, quickly filled with people enjoying her expanded menu, each item named after a book or a character, a collaboration between her culinary skills and Lily's literary knowledge. Alexander found Emma standing by the fountain, watching it all unfold. "Claire would love this," he said softly. "Not just the place itself, but what it represents. The breaking down of barriers, the mixing of worlds, the creation of something new from something loved." Emma nodded, touching the locket she now wore alongside Lily's, a matching one they'd found in Claire's box of treasures. She knew, didn't she, that love would find a way to bring us all together, to make something beautiful from what could have been broken. "Look," Alexander pointed to where Lily sat on a garden bench surrounded by other children. She was showing them the special roses, explaining how they were created from love and patience and a little bit of magic. "She's becoming quite the storyteller. She has 3 lifetimes of stories to tell," Emma smiled. "The ones she's lived, the ones she's read, and the ones we're still writing together." Above them, the special wind chimes caught a breeze, sending notes of Claire's lullaby floating through the garden. And in that moment, surrounded by books and flowers and the family they'd built together, they felt Claire's presence more strongly than ever, not as a ghost of the past, but as the love that had planted the seeds for their future. Later that evening, after the last customers had left and the excitement of the grand opening had settled into a peaceful quiet, the family gathered in their favorite spot, the greenhouse at the Sterling mansion. The space had become their sanctuary, a place where the boundaries between past and present seemed to blur, where 3 generations of love bloomed in every careful detail. Lily lay on the soft cushions they'd added to the curved bench, her head in Emma's lap, while Alexander read aloud from Claire's gardening journal. The evening light filtered through the stained glass panels, painting them in gentle colors that seemed to dance with each turn of the page. "Listen to this entry," Alexander said, his voice soft with wonder. "Today I felt the baby kick for the first time while Emma was reading The Secret Garden aloud. It seems our little one already knows the power of stories. I dream of the library of memories we'll build together, not just books but moments, traditions and love in all its forms." Emma's fingers gently stroked Lily's hair, now loose from its ribbon and spreading like silk across her lap. "She did build that library," she mused, "just not in the way she expected. Every place we've created together, the greenhouse, the bookstore, the garden, they're all chapters in the story," she started. "And we're still writing it," Lily added sleepily, touching the locket at her throat. "That's what Mommy Claire meant in her letter, isn't it? About love being like her special roses, always growing, always finding new ways to bloom." Alexander set aside the journal and moved to sit with them, completing their circle. Above them, the first stars of evening were becoming visible through the glass roof, twinkling like the lights they'd strung through the greenhouse's beams. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I spent so many years focused on the Sterling legacy, the name, the traditions, the expectations. But Claire understood something I didn't, that the truest legacy we can leave is the love we share and the stories we create together." Emma nodded, remembering Claire's words in that last precious conversation they'd shared. "She told me once that she dreamed of a family bound by choice rather than obligation, by love rather than duty. I don't think she could have imagined exactly how that dream would come true, but it did," Lily finished, sitting up to look at both her parents. "Because now we have everything. Mommy Claire's love watching over us, Daddy's heart big enough to understand, and Mommy Emma's courage to help us all find our way home." The greenhouse had filled with the sweet evening scent of moonflowers beginning to open, their white petals glowing in the twilight like earthbound stars. Next to them, Claire's special roses seemed to shimmer with their own inner light, their blue and white petals a reminder of how beautiful things could be when different kinds of love grew together. "Time for your surprise," Alexander announced. reaching behind a planter to retrieve a carefully wrapped package. "Emma and I have been working on this for a while." Inside, Lily found a handmade book bound in soft leather, its cover embossed with forget-me-nots and crescent moons. The title read, "Three Hearts, One Story, The Tale of Our Family." "Open it," Emma encouraged softly. The pages within held their story, not just the facts, but the heart of it. Through photographs, pressed flowers, handwritten memories, and carefully preserved mementos, they had created a family history that honored all the ways love had brought them together. There were pictures from before. Claire in this very greenhouse, Emma in her nurse's uniform, Alexander holding baby Lily for those precious first moments. Then came the 7 years of separation, represented by pressed flowers from each city, where Emma and Lily had lived, along with small notes about the memories they'd made there. And finally, there were pages filled with their new life together. The renovation of the greenhouse, the opening of the bookstore, quiet evenings in Emma's apartment, and grand celebrations at the Sterling mansion. Each memory preserved with the same care Claire had shown in pressing her beloved flowers. "Look," Lily pointed to the last few pages. They were blank, waiting to be filled. "It's like what Mommy Claire wrote. Our story keeps growing." "Just like her roses," Alexander smiled, touching one of the special blooms they'd planted together. "Speaking of which," he stood and retrieved 3 small potted roses, each one grown from Claire's special seeds. "One for each of our homes, the apartment, the mansion, and the bookstore garden, so no matter where we are, we're connected," Emma finished, understanding the symbolism. "Like the moon we all share." Lily touched her birthmark, then reached out to touch the similar marks behind her parents' ears. "Mommy Claire called it our family constellation," she remembered from the letters, "because no matter how far apart we might be, we're always connected by love." The evening light had faded to deep purple, and the moonflowers were fully open, now their fragrance filling the greenhouse with sweet dreams. Through the glass roof, the real moon had risen, its crescent shape matching their shared mark perfectly. "Time for the lullaby?" Lily asked, though she was nearly too old for it now. But some traditions were too precious to outgrow. Together, their voices joined in the song that had connected them through years and distance, through changes and challenges, through loss and discovery. The melody carried out into the night, weaving through the roses and moonflowers, touching each plant Claire had loved, blessing each dream they'd grown together. And somewhere, they all felt, Claire was singing with them, her love blooming eternally, in the garden of their hearts. 6 months after the opening of Claire's Corner Books and Garden, autumn painted the city in shades of gold and crimson. The garden had matured beautifully, Claire's special roses still blooming despite the changing season, their blue and white petals standing out against the fall colors like stars in a sunset sky. The bookstore had become more than just a business. It was the heart of the community. Children gathered for daily story times, often led by Lily herself, who had inherited both Emma's gift for storytelling and Alexander's natural leadership. The family reading room was always full of parents and children sharing quiet moments together, inspired by the love story that had created the space. On this particular Sunday morning, Emma stood in the bookstore's garden, making final preparations for a special celebration. Today marked what would have been Claire's birthday, and they had chosen this day to host their first annual Garden of Stories festival. "The decorations are perfect," Alexander said, joining her by the fountain. Tiny lights had been woven through the trellises, and comfortable cushions were arranged on blankets throughout the garden. Each sitting area had its own small basket, filled with books, treats from Betty's, and packets of forget-me-not seeds for guests to take home. "Daddy, Mommy, Emma," Lily called from the garden entrance. "The first families are arriving." She had spent weeks planning her contribution to the festival, a special performance of Claire's lullaby, arranged for a small children's choir she had organized from her school. The children had learned not just the song, but the story behind it, each one understanding they were part of something magical. As guests filled the garden, Emma was struck by the beautiful tapestry of community they had woven together. Betty's regulars chatted with Sterling family friends, children from different neighborhoods played together among the flowers, and Sister Mary Catherine moved through the crowd, sharing gentle smiles and quiet blessings. "Look what I found this morning," Lily said excitedly, running up to her parents. In her hands was a small book, its cover worn but well loved. It was in the donation box with this note. The note read, "I heard the story of this family's 3 hearts becoming one, and it gave me hope. This book helped my own family through difficult times. May it find a home in your library of love." It was a collection of fairy tales, and inside, the cover was an inscription. "Love like magic finds a way to bloom even in the most unexpected places." "Perfect timing," Emma smiled, "because I have something to share too." She led them to a quiet corner of the garden where Claire's roses grew most abundantly. "I've been working with a publisher. They want to turn our story into a children's book. Not just about us, but about all the different ways families can grow from love." Alexander's eyes lit up with pride and emotion. "Claire would love that. Knowing our story might help other families find their way to each other." "Can I help?" Lily asked eagerly. "I've been practicing my drawing, especially the forget-me-nots and crescent moons." "Of course, sweetheart." Emma hugged her close. "This book belongs to all of us." The sound of chimes, playing the notes of Claire's lullaby, called everyone to attention. It was time for the children's choir performance. Lily took her place at the center of the group, the other children arranged around her like petals of a flower. As the first notes rose into the autumn air, something magical happened. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting a rainbow through the fountain's spray. The light caught the silver threads Emma had woven through the garden, threads that spelled out Claire's words. "Love grows where it's planted." The children's voices blended beautifully, carrying the ancient lullaby that had become a bridge between past and present, between loss and discovery, between 3 hearts that had found their way to beating as one. Parents held their children closer, moved by the pure love in the melody and the story it represented. Betty appeared with trays of her special sunshine cookies, now famous throughout the neighborhood. Sister Mary Catherine helped distribute them, along with cups of the Sterling family's hot chocolate. The combination had become a symbol of how perfectly their 2 worlds had merged, the simple comfort of the diner blending with the elegant traditions of the Sterling family. As the song ended, Lily rejoined her parents. Alexander lifted her up, just as he had longed to do for all those lost years, and Emma wrapped her arms around them both. Together, they looked out over the garden they had created, not just the physical space with its flowers and fountains, but the garden of love they had grown in their hearts. "You know what I think?" Lily said, touching the locket that still held Claire's letter. "I think this is exactly the kind of magic Mommy Claire believed in, not the kind in fairy tales, but the real kind that happens when love finds its way home." A gentle breeze carried the scent of roses and forget-me-nots through the garden, and for a moment they could almost hear Claire's voice in the wind, singing along with the lingering echoes of her lullaby, blessing the family that had grown from the seeds of her love. That evening, after the festival had ended and the last guests had gone home, the family gathered in what had become their favorite tradition, sharing quiet moments in Claire's garden. The autumn moon hung low and full in the sky, casting silver light over the flowers that had brought them together. Emma sat on their special bench, adding photographs from the festival to their family history book. Each page now told a story not just of their past, but of their present and future, a living document of love's ability to grow and transform. "Can I add something?" Lily asked, holding up a drawing she'd made during the festival. It showed 3 crescent moons arranged in a perfect triangle, with Claire's special roses blooming between them. Below it, she'd written in her careful handwriting, "Some people say family is who you're born to, but I learned that family is who you bloom with." Alexander smiled at their daughter's wisdom as he helped her paste the drawing into the book. "You know, I spent so many years thinking I'd lost everything when I lost Claire and you, but now I understand that love doesn't work that way. It doesn't diminish with loss, it transforms, finds new paths, creates new connections." Emma touched the locket at her throat, a mirror to the one Lily wore. "Claire knew that all along, didn't she? That's why she trusted love to guide us all home to each other." The bookstore's lights glowed warmly through the garden windows, and beyond them Betty's diner still hummed with late-evening customers. The two buildings stood as testaments to how beauty could grow from unexpected beginnings, how different worlds could merge to create something magical. "I have an idea," Lily announced, pulling out her notebook, the one where she'd been collecting stories from customers at the bookstore. "People always ask how our family came together. Maybe we could start a special section in the store with books about all different kinds of families, so other people can find hope in our story." "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Emma hugged her close. "What would you call it?" Lily thought for a moment, then smiled. "The Garden of Hearts, because that's what Mommy Claire created, a place where love could grow in any direction it needed to." Alexander added another log to the small fire pit they'd installed in the garden, sending warm light dancing over the flowers. "You know, when I first built this garden with Claire, I thought it was just about growing flowers. But she understood something deeper, that a garden, like a family, needs both roots and freedom. The roots keep you strong," Lily recited, remembering Claire's words from her letters, "but the freedom lets you grow toward the light." Emma opened their family book to its newest pages, where photographs from the festival showed their extended family. Betty serving her famous cookies, Sister Mary Catherine blessing the garden, children singing Claire's lullaby, and countless moments of joy shared between them all. "Look at all the love we've grown," she said softly. "From one person's dream of freedom to a whole garden of hearts blooming together." The night air carried the mingled scents of Claire's roses and moonflowers, a symphony of fragrances that reminded them of how perfectly different loves could blend together. Above them, the stars twinkled like the tiny lights strung through the garden, creating a canopy of earthly and heavenly light. "Time for the lullaby?" Lily asked, though she knew the answer. It wasn't just a bedtime song anymore. It had become their family's prayer of gratitude, their way of connecting to each other and to Claire's enduring love. Together, their voices rose into the night, carrying the ancient melody that had become their story's theme. The words spoke of moons and stars, of love and dreams, of hearts finding their way home. As they sang, other voices seemed to join them, the sea, whisper of leaves, the gentle splash of the fountain, and perhaps in their hearts, Claire's own voice blessing the family that had grown from her deepest wish. The moon cast their shadows on the garden path, three figures that merged into one in the silver light. Their shared crescent birthmarks seemed to glow, connecting them to each other and to all the generations of love that had led to this moment. "You know what I think?" Lily said as the last notes faded into the night. "I think every heart is like a seed. It just needs the right garden to bloom in." Emma and Alexander exchanged glances over their daughter's head, once again amazed by her ability to capture profound truths in simple words. "And this is our garden," Alexander said, gesturing to encompass not just the physical space around them, but the life they'd built together. "Forever in bloom," Emma added, thinking of how their story would continue to grow, touching other lives, inspiring other hearts to find their way home. The night wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, stars twinkling above like nature's own fairy lights. In that moment, they were more than just three people who had found each other. They were a testament to love's ability to transcend loss, to bridge differences, to create something beautiful from what could have been broken. And somewhere, in the Garden of Forever, Claire smiled, knowing that her greatest dream had come true. Love had found its way home, and it would keep blooming, season after season, in the hearts she had helped to grow together.